Good morning. We are ready to get started. Are we on live stream already? Okay. So good morning to all of you joining us for this side event. I wish to welcome you to this official session, UNFCCC side event on reaching women farmers with climate resilience strategies in Africa and Asia. My name is YOUNGO-UNFCCC. I'm Global Engagement and Policy Expert at the CGIAR Gender Impact Platform and also Outreach Manager for the International Potato Center. I wish to welcome our live audience who are joining us via the YouTube live stream. And for this specific event, it's all about recognizing that women and girls hold the key to strengthen climate resilience. So the event will therefore explore gender-responsive approaches and solutions to growing climate resilience in complex situations of vulnerability, food insecurity, fragility, and conflict. You'll agree with me that that's what we are facing currently. And that's why we are here at COP27, to sort of find a quick way forward on how to build the resilience of women and girls, at least for those of us working on gender. We have prepared a great lineup of speakers who will speak to this topic, so we hope that you will be actively engaged in this particular session. For those of us on social media, because we have Wi-Fi available, please tweet using the hashtag #GenderInAg. So gender, I-N-A-G. And you can also follow us on CGIAR Gender. So let's get started. I wish to bring to us our first presenter, who is Anke Oppermann. I'll introduce her. She is the head of Directorate, Decent Work Worldwide, Food and Nutrition Security at the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ. Previously, she was head of Directorate, responsible for personnel and legal affairs. To give us a keynote address for this specific session. Welcome, Anke. A round of applause. Let's encourage her.
Thank you very much, Vivian, and hello to all of you, dear ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank the organizers for the invitation to this side event. It highlights a crucial nexus upon which it depends very much whether we will be successful in adapting to climate change or not. Gender inequality coupled with the climate crisis poses great threats to ways of life, livelihoods, health, safety, and security for women and girls around the world. And I would like to add, not exclusively for women and girls, for men and boys as well. I'm happy to be here with you today to exchange and discuss about the best and most promising approaches to this on the way forward. Globally, we are facing multiple unfolding crises: the climate crisis, the global COVID-19 pandemic and its impacts, the food crisis, and Russia's war against Ukraine, further upsetting global markets. These crises are not gender neutral. Women and girls experience disproportionate impacts from climate change at the global level, yet do not have adequate access to coping strategies due to structural inequalities and restrictive social norms. At the same time, their knowledge and experience, their ability to act as agents of change, is not yet considered adequately. Across the globe, women contribute significantly to agricultural production, and particularly in subsistence systems, household food security. For example, they till and harvest the fields, they take care of the livestock, they process the agricultural produce, they sell the products at local and regional markets. In many countries, however, women are structurally disadvantaged. They are often denied access to capital and agricultural financing. The same goes for access to inputs and productive resources. They have limited access to knowledge about the technologies and innovations and available climate adaptation options. Too often, women's work is generally unpaid, or they are paid less than men. Further, worldwide, only just under 14% of all landowners are women, limiting their ability to act, even with more information. These examples show that increasing threats to poverty and hunger due to unequal access to resources and deeply entrenched social and gender norms need to be addressed through a gender transformative feminist approach. At the heart of the BMZs of my ministry's core thematic strategy, Life Without Hunger, is the sustainable transformation of agricultural and food systems within planetary boundaries. Building resilience is a central goal in all areas of action, and sustainable agriculture and food systems are a key priority, with agriculture research remaining a central pillar here. A feminist development policy is a crucial resilience approach for the urgently needed transformation of our agri-food systems. A policy that aims to overcome gender inequalities and power imbalances more generally. Only in this way, we can also achieve the other sustainability goals. Introduced by our new government in Germany in 2021, feminist development policy aims not only at bringing women and girls at the focus of agri-food development programs, but to overcome all forms of discrimination. Discrimination of women and girls hinders them to live up to their full potential. And this harms societies too. Studies show that gender-just societies are more stable, peaceful, and resilient. Within the feminist development policy framework, Germany is guided by the 3 R's: rights, representation, and resources. Besides equal rights and social, political, and economic representation, women and girls need equal access to land, education, and financial opportunities to develop their full potential. And access to information, which is still limited too often for women, makes it a challenge to respond to climate change. For example, by adopting climate-smart agricultural practices. That is why it is fantastic to see the project reaching smallholder women with resilient strategies in Africa and Asia, addressing this key constraint through innovative video-based extension approaches and methods developed to reach women farmers through extension messaging. And BMZ is a proud supporter of this project. In the conception of climate-smart agricultural strategies, the special needs of women and girls as well as of other underrepresented groups, have to be taken into account. This is only possible if we have sound disaggregated data and content-specific analysis. Ladies and gentlemen, women and girls are agents of change for the transformation of agri-food systems and have to be considered as such to eliminate hunger, improve nutrition, and build resilience to shocks. We therefore encourage targeted programs of research with a gender lens across the system. These programs will consider the unequal burdens and challenges for women facing different crises and, importantly, ensure that innovations are feasible to be uptaken by women and really reach them. Furthermore, projects need to address problems in a multidimensional way, including stakeholders at all levels. This is an objective of the project Reaching Smallholder Women with Climate Resilience Strategies in Africa and Asia. So please let me thank you for all that you have been achieving so far. Let us move forward on our joint way to make this world more equal and fair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anke. And as she said, she is with BMZ, working on decent work worldwide, food and nutrition security. So indeed, she highlighted the opportunities that we have seen with women, that they're not just victims, but indeed they hold solutions. And we know that, as she said, feminist societies are more stable and more peaceful. So we are quite excited at the feminist policy by the German federal government. Thank you so much. So colleagues, allow me to move us to the next session where we are going to hear some expert remarks, opening statements, and what we want to do is to discuss or hear more about what are the policy and research directions. And to start us off for this session, it's my pleasure to bring you Dr. Nicoline, who is director of the CGIARGENDER platform. She's a senior researcher with more than 15 years of expertise in gender, rural livelihoods, agriculture, and natural resource management. She's going to speak to research, evidence, and gaps. Welcome, Dr. Nicoline.
Thanks, Vivian, and thanks, Anke, for opening it up. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm very happy to have all of you in the room. My role here is to talk about research, and research when you're talking about gender in agriculture and in food systems, the role of research in that. And it's a very important role, partly because we all know that a lot of gender issues are very emotive and very personal. So we need to move it to the next level and have the evidence base and the data. And I start by talking about how gender is, as well as climate change, are both very knowledge intensive. And I don't think we really appreciate how much if we really want to move forward. But let me start by talking about 4 narratives that we've had on women in climate change. So there are 4 ways we've been talking about women. So the first one, where research was absolutely vital, was talking about making the invisible visible. So in a lot of agriculture, we did not understand the role of women. We just assumed women were part of the farm, they just did the work. But through research, we were able to show how important it is to actually understand the important role women play in agriculture. Simple things like 2/3 of livestock keepers are women. Now, if you think about that, that means that we need to start targeting our interventions to women when we're talking about livestock. So working with livestock people is important in that sense. And otherwise, we end up with clearly gender-blind projects. The second narrative that we've been having around gender is that women are guardians, guardians of nature, guardians of the world. And again, that's very much a stereotype, and trying to figure out how that stereotype actually follows women, and how then there's a lot of pressure for women to solve the problem. So we need to look at that, and that's again where research is important, to break some of those stereotypes and to start moving towards a more nuanced understanding of how women are involved in climate change. Then the next one that we've had a lot about is women as victims of climate change. This has been used over and over and over again. And yes, we know women are impacted by climate change, but can we change that narrative to become actually women are part of the solution instead of just victims? It's not women themselves who built what happened with climate change. We were not at the table when it happened. And so now we have to solve it because there's an issue out there. So I think, again, one of those narratives that we really need to figure out. And part of it is the researcher's fault. Because somehow our research question kept on being, are women victims? Yeah, of course, then we end up with. So we need to start rethinking our own research. How can we actually show? You'll be interested to know we did a review of about 20,000 research papers. 15 only talked about gender and climate change, of which only 4 actually talked about the real impact. So again, let's do more research to really understand that impact, to really move forward. Then my fourth narrative, which I think is very interesting, is that we do understand that gender is relational. It's about men and women. It's about partly the power dynamics between men and women, and we're doing quite a lot of research to understand that. So that's important. But now we're getting this narrative of we need to engage the men. What does that actually mean? It's as if there's a problem out there, and all of a sudden, we need to engage the men to solve it. I think it's a problem for everyone. Climate change is so big that we can't say, you know, we need to engage men to make it move forward. So I think we really need to start re-examining what we mean with these narratives as we move forward in research as well. And I think that's a very important point where research can actually help. For instance, when I do talk about things like we need to engage men, we do a lot of studies on qualitative studies, for instance, on what women are doing. Can we compare that to what men are doing in that space? So that we actually get a better sense that it doesn't only become we're highlighting what the women are doing, but what are the men doing and how can we work together to become better? I want to pivot a little bit to climate change now because I think it's very important for us to all appreciate the data is there. The world needs to change, especially in food systems. Simple things, water. If you think about it, we will need 2 to 3 times as much water in the future to feed ourselves. What's that going to mean for women? Women can often not even already get productive water at the moment. We have a lot of narrative about women using, domestic water, but do we actually talk about how they can access productive water if there's going to be huge constraints on that water? We need to sort of reimagining our food system, and I think that is important as we move forward. We can't do science and we can't do solutions as we've done them up to now because the food system will have to change. And so that's where we need a lot of people on board. But I've got 3 solutions for you. I always like getting solutions out there too. First one, very simple, listen to women. And I don't mean just, put them on a table, but actually listen to them, which has 2 sides to it. One, we need better data on women. That is still important. We still need gender disaggregated data, I'm sorry to say, and I know we've been saying this many times, and that still means that when you do research, twice your budget, because all of a sudden you have to do it to 2 people in a household. It is as simple as that. So I think that's one important. But also listen to women and provide them the data and the arguments that are important. Again, research can help there. We need a bigger evidence base. That's how we're going to move the agenda forward. My next solution, besides listening to women, is actually putting resources in the hands of women. Don't talk about it, just do it. And one of the big ones nowadays is finance, but I also, coming from where we come from, where we do talk about agriculture, we talk about solutions within the agricultural space. Can we find solutions that work for women in that space? Simple things. Do we have salt water tolerant potato varieties that we can give women? Something as simple as that. Are we including women in our surveillance of animal diseases? Women often take care of animals, so they will see if an animal gets sick. Can we stop zoonotics that way? Can we include women in those discussions? Can we provide them information about those things? Even other things like, can we get better dryers for fish for women, for instance? We know, for instance, in aquatics areas, we do not know much about women in the fish value chain. We need to, again, going back to my first point, we need to make the invisible visible, but we need to find the solutions and put the resources. The last one, and most important, I think, is finance. Can we put finance and can we put money into the hands of women? Because money does talk. And we need to understand that, because money is a whole issue of empowerment. When we talk about women's empowerment, putting money into women's hands has relational issues. How do we deal with that? And again, research works on that. Last but not least, so I said I'd have 3 solutions. Last but not least, the youth. Everybody keeps on talking about youth and how important they are, and I think it's absolutely. Reimagine the food system with them in it. It's their food system, it's not ours anymore, it's their food system. So understand what they want, listen to them as well. But I also want to push girls. When we often talk about youth, we talk about young men. Intuitively, that's what everybody talks about, where we do not have much research and we have not done much work on understanding where girls are all of this. We know that child brides are an important issue, for instance, so let's start looking at that group and let's building a future that makes sense for them. So I just want to finish my one last comment, is I do see there's a future. I do know that we can do it, but it's knowledge intensive and it's not going to be easy because we have climate change, which is very complicated. We have gender issues, which is very complicated, but it's an opportunity. The world is changing and we do need to reimagine a world where we all benefit. So bottom line is, a climate change solution that doesn't work for women is just not a climate change solution. So thanks again for listening.
Thank you, Nicoline. I'll just start from where you stopped, that a climate change solution that doesn't work for women is not a climate change solution. You have these little cards on the aisles. You can pick any with that message that you said. And I had a number of terms. She spoke about rethinking. She said gender is emotive, relational issues such as power dynamics come into play when you're discussing gender issues. And then we need to bring the women on the table. We need gender disaggregated data, which basically means that that's double your budget, so we are talking finance. And then she gave us a way forward that let's look at practical examples, and let's not forget about the young men and the young women. So I think that was quite key. So I'll move us forward, and our next presenter is joining us virtually. Colleagues at the back technical team, you can help us bring to our audience here Professor William G. Moseley, who is Professor of Geography and Director, Program for Food, Agriculture and Society, Macalester College in the USA. He's also a member of the steering committee of the UN High-Level Panel of Experts for Food Security and Nutrition. He's going to speak to us on a feminist political ecology of the West Africa herbicide revolution. Do we have him on our screens? Yeah? Okay, yes, that's our virtual panel. So let's give it up for Professor William. Over to you, Professor. You can hear me? Yeah. He doesn't seem to hear us. While you still try to, okay, something is happening. Yes, I can see him in front of me. Can you? Good. Go ahead, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Vivian, for the introduction, and thank you to the organizers of this side event. My main message is this: while we want women farmers to successfully adapt to climate change, we must also understand that farmers' agency is situated. That is, their ability to adapt is often mediated by broader structural forces. As such, what I hope to shed light on today is a story of maladaptation that appears nonsensical when viewed narrowly, yet rational when we consider broader structural conditions. Further, I will highlight the possibilities for healthier, more resilient adaptation. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start with an introduction, present our research questions and methods, talk about broader structural forces that are driving the uptake of herbicide use, then talk about health concerns, agroecological alternatives, and then I will conclude. Next slide, please. Are you hearing me okay?
We can hear you. Technical team, we have slides. Could you project the slides? Go ahead, Professor.
Okay. So women produce 70% of the food crops in the African context. They're clearly central players in African agriculture. However, they struggle to get secure access to land, labor, and inputs. There's an emerging literature on the role that herbicides have played as a labor-saving technology, yet little has been written about women farmers' use of herbicides. We did a study in 2019 in southwestern Burkina Faso, and we found that 92% of women farmers are using herbicides, and this is alarmingly high, and much higher than past studies have found. Next slide on the research questions, please. We're then looking at changes in the global herbicide industry that are driving the uptick in this use. We're looking at climate change and local economic changes that are constraining agricultural labor. We're looking at the relative power of women within households to requisition labor. And then lastly, we looked at agroecological alternatives. Next slide, please. In terms of research methods, we're working in 5 communities in southwestern Burkina Faso. We interviewed 141 female farmers on their herbicide use. We also did key informant interviews with local vendors and importers. Next slide, please. So, in terms of the global herbicide industry, glyphosate, referred to as Roundup, goes off patent in the year 2000. It begins to be produced generically in places like India and China. And there are very few restrictions on its import into the region. Basically, it gets improved in one country and then it's available for use in other countries. The price of glyphosate in local markets has declined 35% between 2008 and 2015, and now it is widely available by local vendors and villagers, and this increased availability and affordability is driving its uptake. Next slide. Climate change and fluctuating rainfall patterns are driving young people out of agriculture. This is exacerbated by the fact that histories of colonialism and neocolonialism has changed what people are growing. It's discouraged them from growing, saving extra crops, and it has made them more vulnerable to the full brunt of droughts. And this has aggravated labor constraints as they're finding ag less viable and moving into other areas. Next slide. One of the big areas they're moving into is artisanal gold mining, which has been made more viable by lower cost technologies. Burkina Faso is now the 5th leading producer of gold in the African context. By some estimates, 2 out of every 3 rural households have at least one family member who's working in the gold mining industry. According to the government of Burkina Faso, we have 1 to 1.2 million people that are working in this industry out of a country of roughly 19 million people. Next slide. When we look at women's households, they have very limited control over labor resources. In fact, they don't even control their own labor. They have to work on their husband's fields during the day, working on their own fields in the morning and the evening. Weeding is very labor intensive, and so women are using herbicides to manage this problem. And as I mentioned, 92% of women are using herbicides at least twice per season. This is driven by their increasing affordability, availability, and a growing problem of weeds. Next slide. Most women do their own hand weeding. Interestingly, they're paying male members of the household to apply herbicides. studies have shown that this is cost effective in terms of labor saving. And of course, well-timed weeding is critical for getting in a good harvest. Next slide. There are concerns about this uptake in herbicide use. Glyphosate is the top-selling herbicide. It's a potential carcinogen and hormone disruptor. Atrazine is a known hormone disruptor. Most women didn't articulate health concerns, but a significant minority did. They talked about leaky backpack sprayers, concerns about breast milk contamination, and they were very wary of applying herbicides when they had young children with them. Next slide, please. Agroecology is a viable alternative to this approach if it is context sensitive. So polycultures with multiple planting and harvest times can spread out labor demands, relieve labor bottlenecks. More densely planted polyculture fields have fewer weeds, which relieves pressure on labor. Healthier soils tend to have fewer weed problems. A classic example of this would be something like a striga. However, because of the broad structural factors that are driving the uptick in herbicide use, we also need strong institutions, research, and extension support if women are to switch over to agroecology. So just to conclude, women have adopted herbicides in a widespread way in southwestern Burkina Faso in order to address labor constraints. They're now much easier to address and more affordable. This is exacerbated by climate change and the alternative of gold mining. This is an economically rational decision. We need more vigorous vetting of chemicals from a safety perspective, and agroecology is a viable alternative, and women need to be privileged in extension efforts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor William. And as I had mentioned that he sits on the UN high-level panel on experts for food security and nutrition. So we do appreciate those remarks and a very strong ending at the same time where he talks about why we should privilege women farmers in external efforts. I think Nicoline had alluded to that. So we have the final expert remark, and it is my privilege to bring to you Dr. Claudia Ringler, who is Deputy Division Director, Environment and Technology Division with the International Food Policy Research Institute. She is going to speak to us on solutions that work for women in a climate crisis. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for everyone being here in the room today and, being, I guess, in favor of focusing on women with climate resilience strategies. We know that women account for 46% of all agriculture work in Africa, for about a third of agriculture work in India, where we've also worked, and 80% of all livestock work in India, as Nicoline also referred to. With men leaving agriculture faster than women in response to climate extreme events, mostly because they can. It's more difficult for women to find non-agriculture work, so men are leaving quite fast whenever we have a drought event or a heat stress event or a flood. The share of women in agriculture is growing. As such, it should be in the interest of governments and the private sector to directly reach out to women, farmers with agriculture information and climate resilience strategies. However, this is not happening. By either focusing on household heads or by taking a so-called gender-blind approach, women's farmers' needs for information and their growing contribution to agriculture remain overlooked. We fail women every day. So we did some formative research where we found that if women had equal access to information on climate resilience strategies as men had, they would be as likely, and for some strategies, more likely than men to adopt these strategies. So we set out to implement an activity and intervention, video-based extension, sometimes together with posters or SMS text messages, to assess that if we overcome the existing information gap that women face, if we overcome it, would we actually grow awareness of climate resilience strategies, knowledge, adoption, and secondary impacts on women's empowerment, increases in gendered, in yields by women, etc. So that was the study, and we have partners here today from GROOTS Kenya and SEWA India who did this work in those 2 countries. Because they're here today, I focus on the 3rd country, Uganda. So this is from our baseline survey in Uganda, where unsurprisingly, as we had known from prior research, there are significant gender gaps in awareness of climate resilience strategies. In this very long list of practices, there's only a single one, improved pig management, where women were more aware than men that if you improve pig management, you can actually improve adaptation and mitigation of climate change. How can we overcome this information gap? As I've mentioned, we focus on video-based extension approaches. And the reason why we did this, I think you can find on this slide. This shows the primary source and various sources of climate resilience strategies that women and men used both in our baseline and endline. And again, you can see that across all of these sources that women and men currently use, there's only one single source, religious organizations, where women, at least in the endline, were more likely to use it as a source of climate resilience strategies. All of the official and formal information channels, such as extension services, were much less likely to be accessible to women farmers. And just to confirm, in Uganda, only 11% of extensionists, extension agents from the government, are women. We then proceeded to roll out the interventions. The video intervention, it shows climate resilience strategies selected by women themselves, shows women farmers in the videos. But as usual, we did not exclude men, so we had men and women at the event, as you can see on the slide. And I'm just trying to show a minute or 2 from one of the videos in Uganda. And I'm not sure if you can hear the tone. It's okay, it's in a local language. It doesn't matter. This is really just to show one of the 4 videos in Uganda. We also had improved climate-smart pig management, climate-smart poultry management, and integrated pest management. Those were all resilient strategies that women felt they needed more information of to do a better job. Okay, so I'll move on, as anyway we can't hear the tone. I guess give it another 20 seconds. So this is climate-smart soil and water management using these soil bunds, where basically they prevent runoff. So, but as we've already heard, information constraints are not the only challenge that women and men farmers face. So we also asked them, what really stops you from adopting any of these climate resilience strategies if you were aware? Of course, if you're not aware, we can't ask why you're not adopting them. And what we found in Uganda, again, that constraints were overall experienced to a larger extent by women farmers compared to men farmers. And what you can also see here is that lack of funds, as Nicoline said, money talks. Lack of funds was considered to be the largest constraint, followed by lack of information. And we have done similar studies in several other African and Asian countries, and the picture looks actually quite similar. But we also should be aware the practice doesn't fit for everyone. We cannot assume 100% adoption. And some people tried a practice and they felt it failed. So that's also, we have to be aware of that. There is no silver bullet. After we did the video intervention, we assessed if those women and men farmers who had watched the videos, did they change adoption of some of the practices? And keep in mind, this was during COVID. then the war on Ukraine, so there were lots of other things going on. But we did find increased adoption by women farmers of soil buns, so the video you just saw, water harvesting, livestock manure management. We had 2 videos on livestock, and also improved pasture management. So just to be in the room talking about some of those climate resilience strategies also made an impact on resilience strategies not even shown in the videos. And also to clarify, even men increased adoption of some of the practices. Even so, it was all directed at women farmers. To conclude, video extension showing women practicing these strategies can increase awareness, knowledge, and adoption. However, we do have other constraints that obviously limited adoption of some of the practices, and even the practices we brought in were only those we felt and the women felt they could adopt without having access to credit or financial means. If those credit constraints were removed, they would have liked to adopt irrigation and many other practices, but we couldn't also provide them with the credit. So videos, therefore, can be an additional solution complementing traditional extension approaches that we know don't reach women farmers very well, and also complement digital platforms that we also know do not reach women farmers because they have much less access to mobile internet and smartphones. We now have the adoption of these videos as part of the e-platform of the Ministry of Agriculture in Uganda, and one district already bought the equipment to add more videos themselves. And in India, we keep rolling those videos out. And I think Kenya will hear later, they also have used those results for additional implementation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Claudia. And if, as she said, that men are leaving agriculture faster than women because of climate-related issues, then she posed a question that why can't governments then reach out to women with climate resilience strategies? And she has shared about the work in Uganda and spoken about the role of video specifically in ensuring that we are able to bridge the gaps that come in terms of awareness of climate resilience strategies. So thank you very much. We do have an exciting second panel coming up, and in this panel you're going to hear more about what's happening in the field because we have voices from the field, and they will come up in just about 5 minutes. But before that, we are going to listen to Dr. Rachel Besner, who is Professor for Global Development at Cornell University. She's here and she'll speak to agroecology and gender transformative approaches for climate resilient food systems. Welcome. Yes, thanks for encouraging her. She was in another session, but really glad you could join us.
Thank you very much, and apologies for being late. The other session I was in was on gender and climate justice, ironically, so we're competing for the same slot. And I'm going to speak today in part in my role as the coordinating lead author, one of the coordinating lead authors for the chapter on food systems in the IPCC Working Group 2 report, Climate Change Impacts, Adaptation, and Vulnerabilities. And I was the food, fiber, and other ecosystem products is the chapter that I co-led. And then I'm going to switch to a few highlights from my research on agroecological approaches using gender transformative approaches to have climate resilient strategies. And so bear with me as we go from the big picture to the specific findings from my own research. So since AR5, since the last assessment report of the IPCC, the scientific literature is documenting robustly that climate change is worsening other large-scale societal changes. So climate change interacts with things like economic inequity and unequal access to water, food, and other important resources. And gender and other social inequities are really key. They worsen vulnerability to climate change impacts. So it's not just gender, it's gender plus, and that plus varies depending on place. So it might be racial and ethnic minorities, it may be indigenous peoples, it may be low-income households, it may be smallholders, marginalized groups that vary by place, and gender intersects with that inequity to worsen climate change impacts. And we saw this in the example of what we all experienced, COVID-19, that some groups of people experienced worse outcomes, worse impacts than other groups. And it wasn't just women versus men, but it might be farm workers, for example, or low-income women who work in the food service industry that were affected more than other groups. And so in the report, the latest report, we take an approach to gender really taking into account the structures, processes, and meanings attributed to gender and how they affect power dynamics. So it's not just looking at women and men, but really having this closer look at the structures, processes, and relationships of power that affect people's impacts to climate change and also their potential to make change. And so in the report, there's a real focus in AR6 on equity and justice as really being central to developing climate resilient development. And gender is a key aspect of equity and justice, but it's not the only aspect. And one finding from the scientific research is the importance of deliberative and inclusive programming and policymaking. And I know we've had some examples already highlighted here today that support inclusive decision-making. And so it starts with how an adaptation program is developed, how it's planned, as well as how it's implemented. Now I'm going to switch gears. Another focus of the report are in thinking about food systems, ecosystem-based adaptation strategies that really bolster biodiversity and support ecosystem services are an important approach to building resilient food systems. So this is really, agroecology falls under this banner, but it includes a range of different strategies that support ecosystems. And they reduce climate risk, but they also provide other benefits such as livelihoods, food security, and social equity is an important component to take into account if these ecosystem-based adaptation strategies are going to have benefits in terms of food security and nutrition. So agroecology is an approach to agriculture and food systems that really is a holistic strategy that takes into account multiple dimensions of the food system. It's not just about production, but it uses ecological principles and also other principles related to equity and justice to ensure a resilient food system. And previous to my role in the IPCC, I served on the Committee for World Food Security of the United Nations, where we conducted an assessment of the literature on agroecology. And we found that there is strong evidence in the literature that agroecological practices can improve food security and nutrition. Those that are more complex, so not just one practice like agroforestry or using compost, but a combination of practices that include attention to social inequity are more likely to lead to improvements in food security and nutrition. So that's kind of a big umbrella overview, and now I want to oh, yeah, I had one more point. The research shows that one of the key aspects of agroecology is that it uses participatory, inclusive learning around food and agriculture. So it emphasizes co-production of knowledge, drawing on and building on indigenous and local knowledge, and using a host of methodologies like farmer-to-farmer exchanges, farmer experimentation, and really linking with social movements that are focused on sort of grassroots experimentation and learning. And attention to social inequity is a core aspect, is a core principle of addressing social inequity is a core principle of agroecology. So I've been involved in research in Malawi and Tanzania over the past 2 decades plus actually, 25 years, in collaboration with some local farmer-led organizations, and conducted a number of different research projects. And I just want to highlight 3 here before I hand it back to my moderator, excuse me. Whew. All of these research projects examine this question: can agroecological methods be used to improve food security, nutrition, livelihoods, and well-being of smallholder African households? And one of the studies in Malawi explicitly selected households that were highly food insecure. This was 400 households in 20 villages in north and central Malawi using a pre-post design. And so before and after, measuring a number of different outcomes. Another study worked with 6,000 households in central and northern Malawi using a pre-post control intervention design. And then a third study, a sort of sister intervention in Tanzania, worked with almost 600 households using, again, a pre-post and delayed intervention cluster randomized trial design to look at these questions. And as part of the intervention, they were trained on agroecological principles and invited to try out different practices that they wanted to test. But there was also this focus on social inequities and community-based educational strategies to address social inequities based on some of our previous research in the region. And the strategies that we used were drawn from local suggestions. So it included theater, small group discussions, peer-to-peer learning, storytelling, and other methodologies. So this intervention wasn't just about training farmers on how to use agroecological practices. It was about agroecology in this broader concept that included attention to social equity and also included attention to nutrition, particularly child nutrition. And all 3 studies documented significant improvements in food security and dietary diversity for households who were participating in the interventions. Some practices were specifically linked to increases in food security and nutrition, such as the use of compost and also crop diversification, growing a wider range of crops on the farm. So for example, in Tanzania, children whose parents were involved in the agroecology intervention were 1.48 times more likely to have a minimum acceptable diet. But we also found that gender relations mattered for attaining these agroecological impacts, and there was an interaction between the agroecological intervention and gender equity outcomes. So for example, in our study in Malawi, with the 400 households, initially, prior to the intervention, we found that only 10% of households spouses discussed farming with one another. Only 10% of households reported that they discussed farming with their spouse. At the end of the intervention, because of this focus on social equity, and part of the focus was sharing information about farming with your spouse, there was an increase of those households who shared information, who discussed farming with their spouse. And those households were much more likely to improve their food security and nutrition. They were 2.4 times more likely. And, okay, and then we also found the reverse outcome. This is my last slide, thankfully, and that the interventions also showed significant improvements in gender equity. So we found a drop in women's probable depression in Tanzania. We found an increase in men's getting involved in household work in both Malawi and Tanzania. So we found, and we found improvements in women's dietary diversity. So it was an interaction between agroecological practices in this intervention and gender equity outcomes, and gender impacting the likelihood of improvements in food security and nutrition. And with that, I want to thank the speaker, or the organizers, for inviting me, and thank you.
Great, thank you very much for those remarks. And as she mentioned that she's the coordinating lead author for the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change 2022 report, the impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability. So we really appreciate that she could be able to join us and just share some insights. So please join me in thanking our first panel, our first experts who've given us the opening remarks. And I'd like to also invite the second panel upstage. Thank you very much. A round of applause, please. So they'll be coming back later. If you have any questions, please keep them coming. I do want to move us to the next session, where we have Dennis Njunge. He works with a grassroots NGO in Kenya. Claudia alluded to this NGO. It's called GROOTS Kenya. We also have Nozomi Kawarazuka. She is a scientist at the International Potato Center. She works on gender research, and she'll share with us experiences from Southeast Asia. We also have Ms. Fatou Jeng, who is co-lead with the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, a youth constituency, and she also co-founded an NGO in Gambia called Clean Earth Gambia. And finally, we have Mansi, Shah, who is program manager, Future of Work, SEWA, India. Do we have Fatou with us? She will join us. I can see her coming on stage. So, okay, let's get started. And please, any questions you have, we're coming to a quick Q&A session shortly as soon as our experts from the field share some of the insights from the work that they've been doing. So probably I should just sit with you. It might be easier. So allow me to start off this conversation with you, Dennis, who is from GROOTS Kenya, a grassroots NGO. Could you share with us what specific programs you are implementing in your country that address the structural inequalities towards empowering women and girls in the climate crisis we are in?
Okay. Thank you so much, Vivian. I appreciate being here and welcome everyone. So GROOTS Kenya is a movement or network of women-led organization, grassroots women-led organization. It's based in Kenya, working in most parts of Kenya. And basically, the work we do targets directly the grassroots women, and it's actually implemented by them. And I would want maybe to structure it in three. We are working on aspects related to information services, and that's what primarily we've been working with IFPRI in Kenya for the last 2 years, together with our partners in India and Uganda. And really, one of the challenges with grassroots women is that they are consistently excluded from any development work, meaning that even when information is being shared both by government, by the private sector, by donors, they are consistently out of that. Meaning that if you want to get any information within the community, then you will find these gatekeepers who are majorly men in those communities. And so this work has actually been able to structurally demolish some of those challenges and directly go to grassroots women and provide information directly to them, and in ways that are decided by them. Because I like what Dr. Nicoline said, is that we have to listen to the women. And women have their own way of how they want information systems, particularly on agriculture and climate, shared with them. So that is one of the main ways that we've worked around it. The second one is on rangeland management. One of the challenges, Kenya has 29 counties demographically under arid and semi-arid areas. Kenya generally is a water-scarce country with less than 647 cubic per capita, meaning that most parts of the country are under pastoralism, and women predominantly in pastoralist communities within patriarchal communities, and they are highly excluded from development work. And so one of the aspects that we've been working around is on land rights, ensuring that even in those communities and in places where there is communal land, women are able to participate and access a share of that piece of land to be able to practice practices that they can make them resilient. Conflict has been something very common in those communities over pasture and water, and of course these are diminishing resources consistently. And so we've tried to work with women to secure land, but not only secure land, but also invest in those properties to be able to be part and parcel of the process of development and diversify from pastoralist practices so that they can have incomes of their own. Finally, I'd talk about ecosystem restoration. As you all know, loss of biodiversity is a big aspect around climate change and the climate crisis. And we've participated actively to support women participate in ecosystem restoration, particularly through agroecological practices that ensure that they increase their biodiversity within their communities. They have more crops that increase their nutritional aspects and diversity, among other things. So I'll stop at that and let my colleagues contribute. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dennis, for those insights. And I'll jump to my immediate left. I'll come back to you, Mansi. We want to hear also from Fatou on the work that you've been doing in the Gambia on youth engagement and how also your work in the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change fits into that work. If you could also speak to it.
Thank you so much. I'm audible, right? Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Vivian. It's quite interesting. Is it better now? Awesome. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much for that question. Young people play a very important role in addressing the climate problems that we're facing. And I come from a country which is the Gambia. It is one of the most vulnerable countries to the impacts of climate change. And scientists have actually mentioned that if the sea rises for just 1 meter in the capital city, the entire city will be inundated. And this is a place to, or a home to over 35,000 people. And is it better now? Thank you so much. Oh, I feel like a VIP. I have 2 mics now.
You are.
Thank you so much. So, in the Gambia, young people are now playing a very important role in addressing the impacts of climate change, especially among vulnerable communities, including women farmers, etc. As I've mentioned, we are very vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, and we have been facing some of the problems, including land degradation. We've been facing pollution. We've been facing rise in sea level, and also in the agricultural sector, there has been a massive decline. In the Gambia, about 70% of our population actually depends on agriculture for our main source of living and sustenance. And in the agricultural workforce, women constitute the majority, or they dominate the labor workforce as far as agriculture is concerned. And I don't want to repeat the challenges that we're facing because our presenters have actually talked about the challenges that we face as far as climate change is concerned, especially among women farmers. So we understand the threats or the challenges that we face as far as that is concerned. That is why, as young people in the Gambia, we continue to do a lot of mobilization to ensure that we not only build the capacity of young people as well as marginalized communities to the impacts of climate change, but we also ensure that we engage stakeholders, including the government and development partners, to see how we can build synergies and forge partnerships to ensure that there is a collaboration or common work as far as addressing climate change is concerned. That is why at Clean Out Gambia, which is youth-led, and we have been focusing or working on gender-related issues, including working with women farmers, we have been able to do capacity building trainings for women. And currently, we're even doing a fellowship, which is the first She Climate Fellowship in the Gambia, where we're training young people about gender-related issues and climate change. And in addition to that, we have also been ensuring that when it comes to policy work or research work related to climate change, we have been also working with development partners, including the UNFPA and UNICEF, to ensure that we do a lot of research or work related to climate change and its impact on marginalized communities, including women and girls. At the UNFCCC level, I lead the working group on gender and climate change. And in there, that is YOUNGO, we have over 10,000 volunteers across the world. And in our working group, what we have been focusing on is doing a lot of policy submission to the UNFCCC on the Lima Work Program and the Gender Action Plan to ensure that there is increased participation of young feminists in climate-related processes, because we all understand that when it comes to negotiations or when it comes to climate conversations, there has been an underrepresentation of young people, especially, and also women in our delegation. So these are things that we have been trying to push for in our national delegation, so even at the UNFCCC, to see how there can be an increased participation of the most vulnerable groups to the impacts of climate change. In addition as well, we have been doing a lot of capacity building programs for young people, especially from the Global South, because we see that when it comes to their participation as well, there has been an underrepresentation of young women activists from the Global South, among others. I see the moderator bugging me that I don't have time, so I'll just stop here, and I hope I have another time to,
Yeah. Thank you, Fatou. Indeed, you have spoken well, and just showing that it doesn't stop from just working at the grassroots. I like the fact that whatever you're doing, you're bringing it up to this level of the UNFCCC. So I'll come back to you on other questions, but allow me to go to India now. I can see Mansi looking at me. And we just want to understand the work of SEWA and also how you have built resilience of the women that you work with, and also probably tie it in and tell us about some of the agroecological practices that you have actually used to grow the resilience of women farmers. Over to you.
Thank you, Vivian, and thank you, IFPRI, for inviting me to this very important discussion, and also giving me an opportunity to speak and represent the millions of women workers, the smallholder farmers from the country of India and the Global South, the members of SEWA. SEWA is a member-based organization of over 2.2 million poor self-employed women workers from the informal economy, with the twin goals of facilitating full employment and self-reliance to our members. SEWA has been organizing women for over 5 decades now, from over 125 different trades and 18 states in India, and we also work with women workers from 7 South Asian countries. Over 60% of our members are rural, and agriculture is still one of the major occupation. This consists not only the smallholder farmers, but also the sharecroppers and the landless agricultural laborers. And we have learned and seen and had a first-hand experience that because of the increasingly frequent climate shocks, the agriculture has transformed from a sustainable and viable profession into a mere subsistence farming, pushing a large portion of the workforce towards food insecurity and posing a burning question of why does the farmer remain hungry. It has also led to 2 major shifts. The men in the family have started, men and the youth in the family have started moving to non-agricultural professions like construction, transportation, factories, and so on. And the women in the families have started shouldering the entire agricultural responsibilities. However, due to the patriarchal norms and the structural barriers, women hardly have any visibility or identity as a farmer, leaving her outside the purview of government schemes, subsidies, or on agro inputs, agricultural extension programs, as well as market linkages. At the same time, working with these women workers, SEWA has realized that the women's intrinsic tendency of caring motivates them to take on the role of custodians of the environment. We have seen that these very women workers and their tiny and micro enterprises are collectively putting in all the efforts to work on mitigating climate challenges, climate change. And therefore, to bring visibility to the challenges faced by these women, but also their climate action, SEWA has launched its integrated green livelihood campaign, which we call the Haryali campaign, that focuses on building the capacity of its members and facilitating them to implement green solutions, facilitating affordable access to reliable agro inputs, access to finance and market linkages, and thus strengthening their contribution to climate action, while also strengthening their livelihoods and building their resilience. Under this campaign, SEWA provides technical trainings to smallholder farmers using stacking technologies like video-based extension services, audio messages, voice messages, and posters. SEWA also acts as an aggregator for the informal sector women workers and then tiny and micro enterprises on climate action, and promote and facilitate them to strengthen the climate action through activities and initiatives like natural farming, natural and regenerative farming, farm top energy farming, community biogas banks, plantation campaigns, cluster-based farming, etc. Additionally, to address the fertilizer shortage faced by its members and to help them to switch to green farming, SEWA has started promoting adoption of biogas at household levels. The initial cost of the biogas plants in India comes out to somewhere around $650, which is highly unaffordable for the poor smallholder farming households. And therefore, SEWA facilitated linking these smallholder farmers to carbon trading market, thereby bringing down the cost of the biogas plant to mere $100. Even then, since the smallholder farmers are not able to pay upfront the $100 initial cost of the biogas plants, SEWA has set up an innovative financing mechanism which we call the Women's Livelihood and Recovery Fund, that enables these women to adopt the biogas plants at a zero down payment and repay the cost of the plant in easy installments from the savings in the fuel cost. The slurry that comes out of the digester is very well digested and an excellent alternative to farmyard manure. It reduces the input cost, it reduces the weeding cost, and the LPG cost at the household level also reduces. And most significantly, it reduces the methane gas emission and therefore reduces the carbon footprint also of the small and marginal farmers. So through this, I'll just wrap up in just a minute, please. But through these initiatives under the Haryali campaign, the poor and informal sector women workers are making an individually small but collectively significant contribution towards the NDCs and also reducing the carbon emission. On these lines, in the past 6 months, SEWA has facilitated over 500 households to adopt biogas plants at household level, and we also have demand from more than 5,000 members whom we are trying to link up to this biogas, and we have also facilitated aggregating and trading over 5,000 tons of carbon credits at an average rate of $17 per ton. This carbon trading not only helps make the green energy solutions affordable for the members, but it also generates an additional source of income and livelihood for the members.
Great,
so,
great work from SEWA. I would have given you an additional question, but I will have Nozomi answer the question for you. The question I was going to ask you was, so given all these wonderful examples that you've given us, so what does resilience look like? But let me have Nozomi answer that question, probably based on the work that you have been doing in Southeast Asia.
So your question is what resilience means to whom?
Yes.
That is a very important question. So I think resilience has to come with the word equity or inequality, because resilience, without inequality, it cannot achieve resilience. And social and political mechanisms we have to support the most vulnerable and most affected by climate injustice, and to whom, resilience to whom is an extremely important question. For example, from the case of Southeast Asia, now in the coastal areas, climate adaptation is a hot topic. Many donors come to invest in solar powers, wind powers, but in those coastal areas, ethnic minorities are living there. They are not benefiting from those national or regional level of resilience. So we really need to communicate with those ethnic minorities who heavily depend on ecosystems, natural ecosystem in that areas. So resilience, how can we capture those resilience for the most vulnerable? I think we need a more qualitative testimony, evidence, and narratives, the voices from the women, especially from the marginalized communities.
Thank you, Nozomi, for that. Dennis, I will come back to you because you went in first. Are you happy to answer the same question? What does resilience look like to you?
Yeah, sure. I am happy to answer that question. I think to just say that it is very different in different countries because grassroots women or women in general are facing different challenges in different geographies across the world. In Kenya particularly, of course, with the successes we've had right now with the three aspects I touched on, over 6,000 women are able to benefit out of that and be able to fully participate in development. For us, when we look at what they've done, we look at resilience as a couple of things. One, I believe that grassroots women are also looking to sustain their incomes because generally, if you're doing anything, because remember they have already been living with certain levels of incomes. So when you introduce some resilience strategies, you want them to sustain that level of income or even grow much more. So essentially what we are looking at, or the metrics that I would look at is, are they having income? Because then they will not be able to survive if they are not able to do that. Secondly, I'd look at nutritional diversity. One of the aspects around agroecology and creating more diverse systems of food is that in situations where we have malnutrition, for example, in ASAL counties within Kenya, we have a lot of cases of malnutrition. You want women to be able to increase their nutritional diversity so that then they have different sets of food. The dependency of maize, or what people will call corn, I think has to change because there are traditional foods that were previously in those countries, and we cannot let those be lost because then communities lose a lot of what they believe and know about. And finally, I think what other thing we look at in terms of resilience for ourselves is the secure land tenure. Because remember that one of the biggest factors of food production is land. If women are not able to access and have secure tenure on their land, they will not be able to produce food because they cannot make decisions over the properties that they are farming on, meaning that we have to have access, control, but also ownership of land pushed to women more and every single day. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dennis. And unfortunately, I have to bring this panel to a close just because of time. But because we are moving into the conclusion, we need to clear in the next 10 minutes. I do want to give an opportunity to just one person to ask one question. Is there any in the room? Okay. Okay. Just one question. You can just come here. Make it short. In the meanwhile, we have a virtual speaker coming on. If you can put them up. Virtual.
Yes, I think my question, I am Mohammed, working from the African Climate and Environment Foundation, ASEF, from Sierra Leone. I think I have several questions, because you have just limited me to a question. And the question was for the first panelist who presented. this rich presentation here, I really wanted to know, how many of those people are here today that we can use as case studies? The farmers that we are presented, that we can use as case studies for the COP27, so that we create awareness that yes, we are working with those grassroots farmers and they are represented. Because one of the things I know, the farmers out there are marginalized. What I mean is that we can go and do rich surveys with them. They give us what we want. At the end of the day, they have nothing to benefit. I am here. My organization is, I am proud of it because we are taking everybody from the grassroots, and these people are here. This is my first time to be in a plane for testimony, and it's not only my first time to sit in a plane, it's my first time to attend a ceremony or a conference like this. So how many of those people are here that we can use as case studies? That's one of my questions. I think because of I have limited time, I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I do believe is that directed to Dr. Nicoline? Or okay, she'll come on and she will answer your question if she's able to. So thanks a lot to my panel here, getting to hear some voices from the field. We now move on to the concluding part of this session, and we have, so thank you, you can go back. Yeah. A round of applause to our colleagues here. So we are out of time, but I see we wanted to have another question. We'll see at the end of it, but please let's allow colleagues who are online to come on. Do we have the virtual speakers? Yes, on Teams? No. Okay, I can see Nozomi is helping. And Dr. Dihan, you can also come on because you'll give us the concluding remarks. But for now, we are going to bring on Professor Tillmann and Dr. Cornelia, who are with the Institute of Landscape Ecology, University of Münster in Germany. They're going to give us the concluding remarks, sort of the wrap-up and synthesis for this session. So they are coming on shortly, but you can actually already engage our brother as we get them. Are they on? Okay, good. So they are on. Over to you. If you can hear me, over to you. Professor Tillmann? We can't hear him. He seems to be speaking. Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Yeah, you can. Okay, so thank you very much, all contributors and organizers, for this very important side event. So let me sum up some aspects. For me, first, resilience is a nice concept, but it has to be understood in place. So soil, the water, biodiversity, the people. Nicoline Dehaan pointed out, so listen to the women. Yes, do so, but don't forget to listen to the soil, to the wild animals, to the rivers, and listen to the wind. So the wind is getting stronger and the wind will become a storm. This is what we know. But it shows us that it is so important to work on that goals of this conference together for implementation. And it was a strong session to show that we are all ready to gather and implement and not to lose hope, but to act. So young feminist people understand already and act in a promising way. So this was a very strong contribution for me that came from Gambia, and thank you for that. We've also heard which significant role a large number of women play in rural and smallholding agriculture, and what they really urgently need is the right to land. So this is a very important thing we heard at the very end. So the French philosopher Bruno Latour, who deceased just 1 month ago, proposed a new myth or a new view on the earth, and he suggested to use the word Gaia for that. This view is a healing one and unifying one, and it's a female one. It is not dividing into fragments, but seeks symbiosis, acknowledging that it is always the parts that make the whole, and this is only the way to come, how resilience is coming into being. And we should use ecosystems or living systems as a model. Many local ethnic groups in Africa and Asia have a deep intrinsic understanding of all this. However, the examples reported in this side event also show how the industrial growth society, in addition to climate heating, also causes the fragmented decay that thus the loss of ecosystem functions and social cohesion. Climate crisis is one out of the biodiversity and soil crisis. Solution therefore must be include that, like ecological approaches. And with that, I will hand over to Claudia.
Yes, Claudia, please go ahead. Claudia, you're on. If you can hear me, go ahead. We can't hear you. You are muted. Please unmute yourself and then talk. Just 2 more minutes. Claudia.
Do you hear me now?
Yes, please go ahead.
Fine. Yeah. Thank you very much to give me the opportunity to speak in this panel, because I think we have heard how important it is to immerse in the field and in the social local situation, which is a premise for doing agroecology. And we have heard from Claudia that we have to hear women voices, because they have an ability to be agents of change. So, and I have observed that all of you have spoken about the importance to listen to each other. I think that is a very important message in this session that we had today, especially to those people who are in very difficult situations, as Rachel told us. We have to see women in which social situation there are, putting them in a very marginal place. So we have learned that we have to hear and attend local suggestions. Also, we as scientists are able to transform the field, as Rachel has observed, that after the end of the intervention, people began to speak more with each other, which is one important aspect of transformative research where we are working in. And so Dennis said, listen to the women, share with them information. Fatou said, hear what we have to say as youth, and we struggle to bring our opinion as youth, as young people, to the high institutions. Mansi has focused on the informal sectors where women don't even have an identity, and they work to put women together and to build community, which is a very important aspect of agroecology too. And at the end, Nozomi was very poetic, saying, here to the narratives of women to understand what they need to have more resilience. So I'm very thankful for all your thoughts that we could share here.
Great, thank you, Claudia.
Cornelia.
Oh, Cornelia, sorry. Cornelia, yes. Thank you, Dr. Cornelia, for coming in and give us the wrap-up and synthesis. Again, just adding on to what Tillmann had spoken to, Professor Tillmann. So thank you to both of you. And now I'll hand it over to Nicoline, who will conclude this event by offering some concluding remarks. So just another 3 minutes and we're out of here. Over to you.
So thanks again. Yeah, it's on. Yeah. Thanks again, everyone, for being here, and thanks as well very much to the panel for all the incredible insights. I think the things that really come to my mind are systems are important as we move forward. Evidence is important, and you've seen some of those evidence as well. Solutions are important. They're out there. Let's listen to those solutions. Let's build on those solutions. But also, because we do have lack of time, let's target our solutions better, and let's use research in how we target those solutions. And I do want to go back to the question that was asked about voice and about all the people here on the panel and all their experiences. Always first narrative is very important, but I think research is also, it does reflect people's voice. It's not that we're, reducing voices in that sense. It gives a bigger picture of what the other voices are saying as well. So thanks again. Appreciate you spending time with us, and we hope to continue collaboration with everybody in this room and in the future. Time is short. Thanks again.
So thank you again. If you do need a card, we have nice postcards to take to your loved ones. One says a climate change solution that doesn't work for women is not a climate change solution. Another says there will be no climate justice without gender equality. Get a couple from me. And thank you very much for joining us for this event. See you next time. So let's have the speakers on the podium. We are done. Thanks again also to the virtual participants. Thank you so much. Speakers, panelists, all of you on the podium, we take a photo because there's another event coming up shortly. Thank you.